Hello. Today's essay comes to us from George Jensen, and his question is, what do you think is the importance of Eva Smith in An Inspector Calls? So let's think about what an A-star introduction would have. It would clearly set out your point of view, and it would link that point of view to Priestley's purpose. So always start with the right title, The Inspector Calls, and you missed out capitals and you haven't underlined it. These are things which will just antagonize the examiner, and they won't want to give you a top grade because you're not treating them seriously as a student of English. So The Inspector Calls is a play set in 1912 but performed in 1945 after two world wars. At the time, in the 40s as well as in the 1900s, inequality of gender and class was a big problem in England. Okay, so you're starting to look at Priestley's purpose here. There's no apostrophe here, by the way, because these words don't own anything, they're not owners, and we don't need the apostrophe to clarify meaning, so they're redundant. Right, back to the essay. Priestley uses Eva as a catalyst and a way of getting across all the problems women and the lower class, should be lower classes, were facing at the time in a very capitalist period where big businesses infiltrated is a good bit of vocabulary but doesn't quite fit here. You mean dominated the vulnerable. So yes, you are starting to outline Priestley's purpose quite well here. You've introduced the context to do that, which is fine, but your vocabulary isn't quite right. Priestley first uses Eva Smith to signify the corruption in England at the time and the problems women faced. This is seen in the quote from Arthur Burling, "If there weren't factories and workhouses, where would we find cheap labour?" Priestley does this to present capitalist views of exploitation and corruption against the female workforce, that should be, or the workforce of women, and how men at the time believed it was agreeable as well as acceptable to exploit women. So this is starting to be a reasonably sophisticated point, but we're not just talking about any men, presumably, exploiting women here. We're talking about capitalist businessmen, or the aristocracy, due to the low wage that they would have been paid. Furthermore, it shows how women were only employed due to the cheap pay. Well, that doesn't quite make sense. What you mean is they were employed because the price of their labour was cheap, which would be needed not for specific skills. You mean because they are unskilled workers. So you have to be much more careful with your language here, although the idea is fine. This pre-justice, that doesn't really make sense to me, I'm not really sure what you mean, is further portrayed when Burling claims that Eva Smith was a good worker. So I think probably you mean injustice, and ready to work. However, even though women might have been skilled and very efficient with their work, due to the patriarchy of men at the time, she would still lose her job. That's a well-made point. You've used patriarchy correctly. It shows how much power the capitalists had and how they abused this by turning away even the best workers they had. That's a very valid point. Eva is a good worker, as you pointed out, and therefore should be the last person to lose their job. Priestley does this to show how exploited women were and how little chance they had at keeping their job, no matter how good they were at it, indicating how fair it was for women at the time. So this is your best made point so far. You've gone from really specific short quotations to talking about Priestley's purpose in quite lucid detail. So this is your best paragraph so far. Priestley wants to present Eva Smith as the symbol of the lower class. Inhabitant is redundant here. At the time in London, we don't need which lived in. This is shown with her name Eva. Eva can also be referred to as Eve from the Genesis Bible. The phrasing is clumsy here. We'd say Eva is reminiscent of the name Eve from the Bible story Genesis, or from the first book of the Bible, Genesis. From the play, it's evident that Priestley uses religion Well, we're talking about Christianity here, so be as specific as you can. In an attempt to anger religious people towards capitalist mindsets. So that's, again, it's clumsy phrasing. I know what you mean. So to channel the anger of religious people towards capitalist mindsets. But again, it's Christian people. And really, it would help you if you linked that to the audience. The audience in 1945 are by and large at least 90% Christian. By using Eve, well, he hasn't used Eve, he's used Eva. It shows how Eva represents the lower class workforce and how they would be exploited by big businesses. Well, actually, no, the point of Eve is that she's the mother of everybody. So if you're using the analogy of Eve, you're saying that Eva doesn't just represent the working class, actually she represents all women. So anyway, they would be exploited by big businesses just as Eva was, it should be by Mr. Burling. Smith was a very common name at the time. You keep having, however, in your sentences without the full stop. You actually know it needs a full stop, which is why you've started with a capital here. So beware of that. Full stop, then however, then comma. However, Eva was not. The contrast between names could have been done by Priestley to show how women attempted to enter normal society and fit in. I haven't seen this idea before, but actually it's a pretty valid one. That would be a symbolic reason why Priestley has chosen the surname Smith. However, again, full stop, capital H, comma, this was not possible due to their fate of being exploited by these in the patriarchy of business. Very clumsy phrasing again. Exploited by the patriarchy through men of business. This is further shown by Priestley as Eva Smith. You're really annoying the examiner now by, this is a level 2, I learnt this in year 5 skill, a name has a capital. And when you neglect that, it really does turn them against you. As Eva Smith never actually comes on in the stage, never actually comes on stage. This could also signify how hard women attempted to make a name for themselves, but due to this sexist, not sexism, due to this sexist society, it would be, I think you mean impossible, not possible. This is a slightly clumsy point again because it's very general. This bit is specific, which is good, but your development is general. And so you could talk about the sexist treatment that she endures, not being able to find employment, having to turn towards a potential prostitution. Later in the play, Priestley changes Eva Smith's name to Daisy Renton in a desperate attempt for Eva to escape her previous antics. I think you mean actions. Antics means kind of comic actions of which we would disapprove, and that's not really what you mean about Eva. Portraying how women would try to escape the sexist society, which trapped them, I think you mean prevented them from making a name for themselves or making money to feed themselves. This idea of making a name for themselves suggests a desire for fame, and that's not what happens in the play at all. So again, clumsy phrasing that doesn't reveal exactly what you mean. Daisy is used to represent the plants daisies, just like Eva getting picked out of the Palace Bar by Gerald and Eric. Daisies get picked from the ground. Daisies are very vulnerable plants due to their weak roots, which also represents Eva and all the working class women's vulnerability at the time. Very weak roots correspond with Eva's family who are dead, which therefore means she doesn't have any roots either. This was the same for many working class women at that time. Priestley does this to show how easy, or how easily, women were picked up by men who would exploit them due to their weaknesses. That's a very well made paragraph. You could further link it to the migration of workers from the countryside to cities, so they're literally uprooted. And you could be a bit more critical, if you like, about how Gerald and Eric literally uproot her, change her sense of self, which of course is also represented in her change of name. Priestley Also uses Eva to point out the upper class hypocrisy. This is shown when Mrs. Burling says, a girl of that sort would not reject money. Full stop. However, comma, in the play we see that Sheila's marriage, as well as Mr. Burling's, was solely for the purpose of finance and business, as well as name in society. Yes, that does work very well. So I misread that as Mr. It's Mrs. Good. This is shown when Mr. Burling proposes a toast to Gerald's family business as well as the Burlings. Again, you're really annoying the examiner here. Joining to create a monopoly and exploit society. Yes, how are they exploiting society? You really mean the working classes here, probably. Mr. Burling saw Sheila's and Gerald's marriage as a business transaction. Excellent. It would help to have a quotation to back that up. Priestley does this to provoke anger at capitalism. At the time, in the crowd, I don't really know what you mean by that, and I don't think you need it, as well as the stupidity of upper class and capitalist people at the time. To correspond with this, well, this is your last paragraph. It ought to be a conclusion. In your conclusion, you're going to finish with a quotation with any luck, and you're going to look outwards towards the future. Let's see how you do. To correspond with this, Priestley's attempts to show how women did not choose to go into prostitution, nor enjoy selling themselves just for the fun of it. Okay, you haven't proved that yet. Due to capitalist businessmen, which are represented by Mr. Burling, many women did not earn enough money to make a living when working in a factory, and by which they would get exploited by hard-headed businessmen, much like Mr. Burling. As a result, they were forced to do things which they wouldn't normally do. Well, that's a general point, doesn't score any marks. Always be specific. What were they forced to do? For example, to strike to get better wages. This is shown when the inspector tells the Burlings that Eva swallowed a lot of disinfectant. Eva uses disinfectant to get rid of what she believes is dirt and disease inside her body. Possibly, I think this is a made-up quotation though, isn't it? I certainly don't remember that in the play. This indicates how bad she felt about her past and how working class women detested that sort of life, but were forced to enter it due to fate and being born into such a capitalist and sexist society. So I think by that sort of life, you mean having to compromise on their morality and offer themselves sexually to richer men. In which case, be specific. This is, again, general. Priestley does this to show how difficult life was for women and the working class at the time due to a society ruled by money-fueled and uncaring capitalists. Now, that's a delightful sentence. I'm really pleased to see that in your conclusion. This would have sparked anger at the time in the audience. It would help here if you pointed out that this was the audience in 1945 who are facing a general election with the opportunity to change the political future of the country and to give rights to women, to take them away from the uncaring capitalists and give them the offer of not equal employment to men, but an aspirational employment like men. If we just jump into the AQA mark scheme and look for a best fit, is this a sustained response to the task? Well, yes, it is. You've written over 900 words, which is incredible. Is it considered? Yes, you've considered it quite well. Are the details linked to interpretation? Yes. Have you looked at the writer's language and form and structure? Now, well, you've definitely looked at the language all the way through, and you've had some thoughtful consideration of ideas and themes. So you probably got all of that. We're deciding now whether it's qualified or whether it's exploratory. So with the exploratory, do you consider more than one point of view? Yes, probably we could argue that when you start to consider the choice of her names as Eva and Daisy, you are being exploratory and you are starting to be analytical about details. So you're probably in band 5. There are a few qualified things, you know, where I found fault with your essay. That's what the examiner means by qualified. So I'm not going to give you the top mark here in that band. I'm probably going to give you in the bottom of that band 21 or 22 out of 30. Now remember, that's my gut instinct. It's not a guarantee that you'll get that sort of mark. And as I keep saying, if you put 5 English teachers in a room together, they'll all come up with a different mark. In fact, we did this at school just today and found exactly that. Well, I hope you found that helpful. You should know how to improve the essay. And if you'd like any more videos, don't forget to subscribe.